Hello, welcome to Level 2 of Special Education Assessment, a collaboration between Matrix Parent Network and Dominican University. Please view this video in preparation for our Level 2 assessment course. So first we're going to do a quick review of understanding scores in regards to special education assessment. We're going to talk a little bit about the idea of relative strengths, and then the focus of the presentation is going to be looking at different areas of processing and how those different processing strengths or areas of need can impact academics and what types of interventions and accommodations we can utilize to give all students access to education at school as well as success at home. So just a quick review. When we look at special education assessments and we look at normative data, we can look at scores in a variety of ways. The raw score doesn't really give us a whole lot of information, especially if we don't understand the test, because the raw score is usually just the number of correct items. Another type of score that might be reported are age and grade equivalents. These are most often reported due to the fact that they seem simple to understand. Oftentimes schools will report an example of a student performing at a 5th grade, 6th month level. But those scores can be a bit misleading. So I'm going to encourage us to really focus on standard scores and percentiles, which should be reported for each area of need. You also might see confidence intervals reported. Confidence intervals are really a span of standard scores or percentiles that a child may perform because all tests have error. And if there's error in a test, that means that from one testing session to another, the child's performance may vary slightly. So the confidence interval tells us where the lowest score and the highest score that our child is most likely to fall in, even if they were tested under multiple situations. So let's talk a little bit more about standard scores and percentiles, as those are going to be the scores that we're really focusing on. So those two scores are directly related and correlated. The standard score falls on the normal bell curve and is translated into a percentile to help us understand how the performance compares to other students of that age and grade level. So for example, if a student scores in the 98th percentile, it's an extremely strong score, it's telling us that they scored as well or better than 98% of their peers. So that's an extreme area of strength. A standard score of 80 would fall in the 9th percentile. So when we look at that score, we would say that the student scored as well or better than 9% of their peers. So it really helps you to see how your child compares to other students. Now, looking at our visual, you can notice that the average scores generally, depending on the test, fall between 90 and 110. And as we move away from the mean of 100, so that's the average score that falls right there in the middle, you can see it aligns with the 50th percentile. The further we move from that average score, the fewer number of students are performing in that range. So for example, if you look all the way to the right where you see the 98th percentile listed at the very bottom right portion of the visual, we're only going to have really a 2% of the population falling in that area in regards to score. Conversely, if you look to the far left of the visual with a percentile of 2, only 2% of the population is going to fall in that score area of a standard score of about 70. So we're going to continue to use this visual in order to understand our own students' strengths and weaknesses across academics as well as processing. So something to really keep in mind is this idea of relative strengths. Now, because the assessments to qualify for special education are standardized and they are normed, they have to be delivered in a very consistent manner. There is a script, there is a format that the assessments must be given in. So when we analyze scores, we have to remind ourselves that these scores tell us how the child performed without any specific supports. Now, as we know, the purpose of an IEP is often to embed accommodations and modifications into the environment in order to ensure that every student has access to succeed in learning. Well, those accommodations and modifications are not being utilized during this testing process. So it's really important for us to keep that in mind. The other piece is often when we look at that bell curve, we might assume that a strength is going to fall all the way to the right and those kind of high average ranges. Well, for some of our students, we have to really look at relative strengths. We may have individuals that have scores that are all in the low average or below average range. But when we look at those scores and we analyze them, we're also going to see areas of relative strength, areas where the child is performing more closely to the average range. And we really want to focus on those and help to utilize those strengths to bridge the gaps across other areas. So we're also going to talk a lot today about processing. And I think that the way to really understand a student and the way they perform in the classroom as well as home is to understand the way that they learn and how they process information. Because if we understand where their strengths and weaknesses lie there, we can better meet their needs. So the processing tests are an important part of the special education assessment, generally given by a psychologist. And what's really fascinating is to look at how the processing impacts the academics, as well as what kind of research-based supports and interventions we can use to help navigate through the processing need. Also, just to mention that processing is a part of the formal process to qualify for a learning disability. So there's a variety of processing areas, and you're probably going to see, if you look through your own students' assessments, you're going to see these processing areas identified and defined in the testing, and we're going to spend some time looking at each one. So first we're going to start with short-term memory. Short-term memory is a very short, immediate holding of information. So it's really, you're holding something in your short-term memory for a very quick amount of time in order to use it in an immediate session. One great example of this is if someone tells you their phone number and you need to hold it in your short-term memory while you walk over to a piece of paper to jot it down. So people who struggle with short-term memory may have difficulty when they have to do longer multiple step problems. They may lose their place a lot when they're in the middle of an assignment. They may find it difficult to listen and respond to multiple step directions. There may be issues with spelling because they struggle to hold those spelling patterns in their mind. And it can also impact reading comprehension because they may be reading and struggling to hold the information in their mind at that point. So some strategies that can help with short-term memory include using very short instructions, giving the student a lot of repetition and review, as well as helping them with memory strategies. So for example, mnemonics are really wonderful strategies where students can create meaning in order to store things in their long-term memory so that it kind of bypasses the short-term memory issue. We also might have them practice verbal rehearsal. So going back to the example about the phone number, we all utilize this strategy at times where you hear the phone number and you quietly whisper it to yourself over and over until you're able to write the number down for future reference. Including visuals, chunking important information, all of that is key, as well as possibly reducing the amount of information to be memorized, or chunking it is another example. in order to give them greater access. Visual processing is another example. This is the ability to take in information from your eyes. So not only take the information in, but how do you view it and interpret it? So students with visual processing issues may have difficulty keeping their work organized on a page. I've noticed many students who start perhaps a math problem in the bottom right-hand corner as opposed to, carefully planning out their work. They may get overwhelmed if there's too much text or graphs or visuals on a worksheet, and they may also have difficulty with math. So some strategies to assist with visual processing is giving a student note-taking assistance, having them utilize graph paper to help better plan out their visual spatial needs, giving them a verbal description of a visual. So for students who struggle with visual processing, charts and graphs and maps may be very difficult for them to take in and understand. So pairing the visual with a verbal explanation can be really helpful. Any type of hands-on materials and manipulatives are going to help, as well as having the student use self-talk. So kind of a think aloud where they're really looking at the visual and talking through it. As well as increasing, again, the pairing of the verbal with the visual. Auditory processing is the ability to take in verbal information and separate the language and the sounds. So you're really able to notice and compare the auditory or verbal information. So students with auditory processing difficulties really struggle when information is only presented in one way, in a verbal way. Auditory processing can also create difficulties with reading, especially around sound identification. And students with auditory processing may also seem to be listening, but don't seem to take in or understand the meaning of what's being said. So in order to combat this, students with auditory processing may benefit from direct instruction with phonemic awareness, so really understanding and hearing those sounds and the difference in sounds. They also generally need more systematic phonics instruction for longer periods of time. Absolutely pairing any sort of auditory information with visuals or lists or any sort of secondary way that they can process the information will be helpful. Students with auditory processing also may struggle with pulling out sounds and information in a noisy environment. So it's really important to keep kind of a calm environment without a lot of background noise. Long-term storage and retrieval really refers to the ability to not only store new information in the long-term memory, but also to access and bring forth that information. And to do it, to pull that information out in a fluent way so that you're able to retrieve the information that you need quickly so that you can attend to a task. So students who have difficulty with long-term storage and retrieval often struggle with remembering phone numbers. They may have had a difficult time memorizing their math facts or recalling their math facts in a quick and fluent way. They may have a long delay when they're asked to answer an academic question or refer to something that was learned in the past. This may also lead to a difficulty in learning to read. Some students may also say that they know the word or the answer, but they can't pull it up quickly in order to engage in the current conversation. So to help students with this issue, using repetition, again, the mnemonic instruction. So an example of that would be using Roy G. Biv to help students remember the colors of the rainbow, where each letter stands for something. R for red, O for orange, so that you're giving some more meaning to something that might need to be memorized or recalled. The use of graphic organizers can really help to organize information in a meaningful way, which helps with memory, the use of visuals, and also additional time. So we really want students to have the time to process and retrieve the information. So a strategy such as a think, pair, share, where a student gets a question, they can think and reflect on it, they can talk to a partner, and then be asked to be called upon on the whole group, can help them get really those cues to retrieve the information that they need. Creating a multisensory environment with lots of hands-on learning where the instruction is meaningful. And then also research shows that activating the emotional center of the brain can really help with retrieval. So that can be using humor, drama, movement, and again, that more meaningful instruction where it's really a real life experience. Processing speed is another area to consider, and this is what we refer to as mental quickness. It's the ability to do something automatically and quickly. And fluently implies that the task is generally timed. So we want to see that a child can engage in the task quickly and automatically. So students who struggle with processing speed may have difficulty completing assignments in a reasonable time. They might be always the student who's just getting started when everyone else is wrapping up. They may have a hard time participating in class, especially if the class is moving very quickly without a lot of wait time. And this student may also come across as inattentive or unmotivated. So some strategies are to provide more time, to focus on the quality and accuracy of the work and not the speed. There is a lot of examples when speed may not be the most important factor in an assignment. Giving the student note-taking assistance, as that would help them to attend in the moment because it's going to be difficult for them to keep up with the lecture. There is research to support that practicing building fluency and using timed tasks where the student graphs their performance and it's very personal and individualized where they're trying to improve upon their own processing and fluency as opposed to being compared to others. Also thinking about, is it necessary for a test to be timed? Is that the most important feature of the assessment? Shortening directions and assignments can also be helpful, as well as just increasing wait time, giving all students the time to process the question and the information before calling on a student. Fluid reasoning is often the application of a lot of these skills. It's the ability to solve a problem and to reason through a problem. It's really a more complex cognitive skill. So students who struggle with fluid reasoning have difficulty applying their learning to real-world problems. They may struggle to try a new strategy, and they may show difficulty, especially with reading comprehension when it gets to higher level thinking. So in order to support students with fluid reasoning issues, you may use experiences, learning in a real environment. You're going to want to combine physical activities so the student is actually really physically engaged with the problem solving. And also allowing students to show their learning in a variety of ways. Reflection on learning also has an impact with reasoning, so allowing students to go back and think about their own learning and talk that through the use of think alouds. And finally, also teaching the students techniques for learning. So what do good learners do? They ask questions, they think about the main idea, and this can give them some metacognitive strategies to really think about their own learning. So a few takeaways, and again, this is a follow-up to Assessment 1, and we will be taking this information and really applying it at Assessment 2 through the Dominican and Matrix collaboration. So we're definitely encouraging you to bring your most recent assessment, and we will be using it as a tool to really apply this information and to get teachers and parents collaborating on the same page. So the first piece is that if we understand a student or child's processing, we're better going to be able to understand how to alter our methods in order to reach them. The second piece is that we really want to assume that if a child can do well, they will do well. Oftentimes, children with processing issues come across as being defiant, unmotivated, inattentive, when really it's a processing piece that is getting in the way of their access. So if we assume that and we think about changing our own methods, we can really help strengthen them academically. And finally, all students have strengths, and we really want to focus and look at how we can use those strengths to bridge the gap in other areas. Thank you so much for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you shortly.